It was one of my favorite places. It was so important in the 400 years between the Testaments. So I'd read a lot about it before we went on our trip, and then there was so much information there, and I learned so much about the daily activities on that during a very important time during the first century. Of course, we start our morning. This is a sunrise, but you just can't see it around the corner there. We're looking basically north from our balcony, but with the construction of the hotel, we could not actually see the sun. But it is early in the morning. Mountain range, Marcia? Okay. Moab mountain range that you can see in the background. And then we get to Masada. I'm going to leave this up, this particular picture up for a little while, and we're going to talk. To me, when we look at Masada, we have to break that lesson down. It's a 3-part lesson, and I'm sure we can finish it, but I can't get hung up on anything, or I won't be able to. There's 3 ways up there now. In the first century, there was only one way up. And it was through this, you can see just a piece of it here, what's called Serpent Trail or Snake Road. It is a winding switchback road. We did not have anyone in our group to walk up there. We did have some of the younger ones to walk down. And the path down, of course, you're dropping in elevation about 1,300 feet. And it took them about 40 minutes to walk down. So I thought they walked pretty fast as far as I was concerned. Well, I'm not going to have a pointer tonight. Today there's three ways up. This would be looking pretty much east, the east side, and if you'll notice right down here at the bottom, there is a square building right here. That is a tram that'll carry, I think it said 16 people at a time up there, so you can get up there without having to climb. Okay. Of course, on the back side, there is a ramp built, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the lesson. But as we go around, most of my pictures will be pretty clear on going around the perimeter and looking down on this, and you will see little squares and rectangles around through there. That was where that 10th Legion, the Romans, built camps. And even when they were tent campers, but even when they tent camped, they built rock walls around their tent camp, and they also built a rock wall to hang their tarps off of. But there's 2 right here, and if you'll notice this line going right through here, they built a wall around Masada. Okay? They didn't want anyone coming in. They didn't want anyone getting away. I mean, this was the last stand, and we'll talk about their journey to get there here in a little bit. But while we're getting to the actual facts on Masada, we've got to talk about Herod the Great just a little bit. I think Jonathan is accredited for building the first fortifying Masada. Like I say, it's 1,300 and some change feet high. It's basically, the top of Masada is about sea level, because if you remember how low the Dead Sea is, the top of Masada is pretty close to being at sea level. When Herod came in, of course, Herod was as comfortable in Rome as he was in Israel. Okay? He actually started his growth to power when he was about 15 years old. He was very young when he was given some territory to govern in Judea. But when he really built this, and this was called basically a summer vacation place that was fortified for him and his family, he was already, Rome had given him the title of King of the Jews. So when he did something, he was all in. We'll go ahead and look. If you remember how he was a very evil person. If you remember, he had 2 of his wives killed, 3 of his sons killed. When he was sick and dying, he knew death was imminent. He felt like the masses there in Jerusalem, or there in Jerusalem or in Israel, they were actually celebrating. So he goes out and gets several, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but he gets several people that's very endeared, rabbis, very endeared to the people there. And right before he dies, he has them killed, okay, publicly executed, so there would be mourning at his funeral. Okay. Well, he was half Jew. Yeah, he was half Jew. And if you stop and think about it, you go, well, why did he need all of this fort here? You know, he had the support of Rome, but Cleopatra would have, if she could have met the right man during his lifetime, she would have had him killed. Okay, the Queen of Egypt. Okay, she was after him bad. Also, he was from the lineage of Esau. So he wasn't supposed to be over, the Jews didn't feel like he had any business in a high priest or being entitled King of the Jews anyway. So he not only had to watch out for enemies on the outside, part of this was in case the Jews ever turned against him and wanted to kill him, he had a place to go with his family and protect them. Turn to Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. We're going to read verses 41 through 44. Luke chapter 19. This is Jesus. The title in my Bible says, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. He is telling them what's going to happen and gives a pretty good description of where it's going to happen. Verse 41 says, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days are coming upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, and you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." Okay? Whenever Rome in AD 66, when the Jews finally rose up, you know, there's a little something that's, I've wondered about that, and some of you may be able to answer it. Rome treated the Jews, you might say, kind of decent, because they allowed them to carry on their religious traditions. And most countries that Rome conquered, they did not give them the privilege of doing that. But in AD 66, the Jews had had enough. Okay, and they, as a matter of fact, they took Jerusalem. There's a group that took Masada, because Romans were fortified at Masada. They took them. and when just had an uprising all up in the Golden Heights, in Galilee, Jerusalem, all the way down through Qumran and Masada, down south to the Dead Sea. And when Rome started to come back and rectify this, they started up in the Golden Heights, went through Galilee, taking things back, worked their way down, and it was actually AD 70 before when they got to Jerusalem and took it down, and it took several months for them to do that. When the Zealots were fortified in that temple area with, sorry about that, they were hard to get out. They put up a fight. They knew how to fight. And then they had the Sicarii in there, remembering what those guys were, the dagger men. It was quite a battle, and they came through and took everything back. And then when they got down to Masada, that was the last one. And they learned something in Jerusalem. The Zealots would be in a battle, and they kept nipping them from their flank, coming up on them. And that was the purpose of the wall all the way around Masada. They wanted to protect their flank. They wanted to make sure they were going to make the statement: no one was getting out, no one was coming in to help. So, very, very important time. And this time frame that we're going to talk about tonight is from AD 66 to 73, when Masada actually fell, when the Romans actually breached the wall and got in there. It was AD 73, and they spent over 2 years getting up there to get it done. And we'll talk a little bit about why it was so long. We're going to breeze around showing more of these pictures. You'll look and see the Dead Sea in the background. See how desolate things are here in front. And you can see the little white curved line there is remnants of that wall. And when they built these walls, we're talking about 10 to 12 foot high. And they'll be 3 to 4 foot wide, deep in there. So a lot of stones were used. See the mountains of Moab in the background. Again, the Dead Sea. This picture, I'm trying to see, that picture is looking, I guess, be northeast. Yeah, northeast.
I read somewhere that it's like from Masada to the Dead Sea was like 12 miles. That far?
No, it's not that far. No, it's not. I'm going to say it's less than 3 or 4 miles. I mean, it's when we were back on the other photo, you could actually see the highway that runs down through there. It's not very far at all. Okay, this is up actually standing in the living quarters on the terrace of Herod's palace that he built for him and his family. He actually built 3 palaces on top of Masada. Masada, the top, I think it's referred to as a trapezoid, but the top of it is approximately 23 acres. So it's a pretty good size place and relatively flat. You know, it's flat enough to build on, but it does kind of roll and swoop around. But this is a 3-tier. If you've ever seen a picture from the side, and I know we've got some really good pictures of it here in the albums, but he built his palace in 3 tiers. The top floor was his living quarters. There's basically 4 rooms with a big open courtyard. Of course, there's all kinds of tile work and everything, and a lot of columns. A lot of the columns, now the rocks that they used to build these things came from Masada. Okay, but the column work that's done in there, it actually, most of it came from Rome. it was brought in. When you're looking out from this, it's looking towards the north. The living quarters is on top. The middle tier, the one that's round here, was more of a reception area, and a library was in there. And then the bottom was more rectangular, and it was an entertainment area, a greeting area, a place where they might entertain people there. There was another palace built basically on the south end. I think they call it the Western Palace, but it's closer to the south end. Well, this is right out on point on the north. It's the largest structure on Masada. It's bigger than this one. So this was his personal vacation place. See, this is one of the biggest encampments. This is Flavius Silvius, was a Roman general that was heading up, and this was basically his first battle as commander. He had been second in command, but he was given charge of this, and this was the largest area that they had for encampment there. And you can see, I mean, the cliffs are just pretty much sheer down the sides of Masada. Hey. I wish I had my pointer here, but this is it right here. Now on this one you can see this is the wall coming through here. They're actually outside the wall with that encampment for whatever, I don't know what reason that was for, but okay. Floors in the temples, there were bathhouses. There were a lot of floors when they dug this, excavated up there. A lot of those floors and walls. We'll show you some artwork here in just a minute, but these mosaic floors, this was in the Western Palace of Herod. Okay. No. I'll tell you what they did. Masada itself gets less than 3 inches of rain a year. So you say, well, how in the world, if they don't have a well, they're in a desert, where are they getting their water? Well, the mountains, and maybe I can go back, the mountains in the background, way back over the top here, gets a lot of rain. And on this caliche stuff, when that water falls in the mountains, it's going to go downhill and it's going to go towards Masada and the Dead Sea. They built dams and structures that canaled that water, just like an aqueduct, canaled that water to cisterns in the side of Masada. Okay? And we're talking about, they had the capacity to hold, it was over 10.5 million gallons. Okay? That's what they had the capacity to hold. They would catch rainwater, which come just normally during the winter time, down through there, catch it, and then they had pack animals and slaves that actually went in those cisterns and carried it to the big cisterns up on top. So they had a big supply of water. Whenever Rome took this thing over up on top, and of course we'll talk about it as we finish, there was enough food, and these people, the Sicarii and the Zealots that were up there doing battle with the Romans, they wanted to make sure the Romans know that they didn't get starved out and they wasn't out of water. They had enough to last. They said for 10 years. That was the number that I heard. So It was water collection. Okay, this is the Western Palace here. As we go through and look at these, and these, of course, these pictures don't do it justice, but you go through and look at these. Normally, this will be a reconstruction, but in that building, they'll have a black line to where, when they dug it up, where the original standing wall was, they'll put a line in the mortar to where you can see what was added to it. Warehouses. There were 29 warehouses. Now here they left one disassembled, like they found it, like they dug it up. These others, they built those structures up so you could see how much area they had. Josephus says in his account, when the Romans took this over, there was enough food there for years, for thousands of people. And the food, some of that stuff, when we're talking about dates and stuff, fruits and things that they grew over there, in that dry climate, some of that stuff was up there. King Herod had put it there. And they said it was just as fresh as it was. Of course, they did a drying process on everything anyway, but a lot of food, storage space. This is in the synagogue. Of course, this is Svika telling us what all happened. See the line in the background there on the wall? Anything above that was reconstructed. We really appreciated this guy and how much history knowledge he had and how much he could tell us about this area. But also, he brought pictures. He actually got married right there in that synagogue 28 years ago. Had his whole family up there, her whole family up there, and I'm going, this guy must be somebody to be able to do that. And 28 years ago, I don't know if the tram was there. I don't know if they all had to walk up. I didn't ask him that when I had the opportunity to, but just thinking about it logistically was something. But yeah, I don't have any other notes on that, just other than it is a synagogue. Did Herod really need a synagogue? He probably didn't. Okay. This is a ramp I was talking about on the back side. This would be on the west side. A lot of times the slaves are given credit for building this. Just had Romans, but this is a construction it's not just a pile of dirt going up to the top of Masada. There was a canyon there. They put a wood structure in there, and I don't know where they get all of their wood, but it was a wood structure like we might put up. It was made square boxes, and each one got taller as it got closer to Masada. And I say boxes, they looked more like a railroad trestle, possibly, underneath there, and then they would fill it full of rocks in the center of those, and then start putting the dirt on top of it. And this took months to build. And they kept building that up, and I'm sure that they used slaves somewhat up on the front end of that thing, because as they got up there, now the zealots, they're up there rolling stones down on them. They're throwing the grape shot at them, catapults, throwing rocks at them, shooting arrows, flaming arrows, and they're down there trying to work and move this dirt around. So I'm sure they had some of their Jewish slaves up there on the front end, because the Zealots didn't want to kill the Jews. They probably used the Jews as a decoy, but the Roman soldiers built that and engineered that ramp that goes up to the top of that. Now, it has, in 2,000 years, it has eroded. It's not as tall as it was then, to where they came up and broke into that outer wall. But again, a major physical feat there. In the 5th, 6th, and 7th century, the Byzantine church was there. The monks were there. They got up there for the solitude, to get away from everybody. This is a picture of a Byzantine church, about 600 CE. I got 2 or 3 pictures of that. You can see they used, it looks like shards of pottery probably that they picked up and plastered on the walls and in the floors of their church building. Really don't know if that's a column for support of a roof, or if it was an altar, a place for an altar. But again, it's in the Byzantine church, and you can see they plastered those rock walls where they would look more like what we might see in our walls today. See the designs and some of the things that they use. The big cisterns, Tim, that they have, all of the rocks, even these square rocks, they're cut out of Masada. When they dug all of the pools and dug all of those cisterns, dug the moats, anything that they dug around there, that mountain was made out of fractured rocks. And so they harvested all of this stuff right there on site to build all of this stuff, the stonework. Here's this is a picture of a pool here, a public pool. You can see the line around it, what was originally there. See right down at the bottom here on the column and also up on the wall. But if you'll look up at the top, up there, and see those little cubby holes, places for people to put their clothes. Now, I guess when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do. The Romans didn't wear clothes when they, public or whatever. So they just pulled their clothes off, and I'm sure at times this was probably used as a cleansing pool for the Jews. We know that there were some Essenes up there also. That's the small palace. It's actually more towards the center and south. It would be east of the south and east of the West Palace. But it was a smaller area, and it wound up being rebel dwellings, where they lived in a lot of these places. And you can tell they were converted from entertainment places to places to live. Again, there's Svitka, and our bus driver's name, you remember? Huh? Roman. And that is a job. I don't know what kind of training you have to go through to drive one of those buses over there. Their streets are so narrow and so winding, and they're so old. Everything's built. It's like an afterthought, and I'm sure they grow so fast, and so we go would squeeze through a lot of places I didn't see how the bus would fit. Couldn't see how it would fit. But who were the people that got up on Masada? We talked about in 66 AD is when the Jews revolted against Rome, and they actually took back their stuff. They kicked Rome off the top of Masada, and it was a group of zealots and Sicarii. Now, and Marcia and I had this discussion today. You know, that's not one and the same. The Sicarii, they were assassins. So we'll see where, just like when Rome was battering on this wall, when they finally broke it down, it was about dark. So they go back. It's dark, so it's the end of the day. We're going to go back to camp, and we'll come up here and we'll kill them all tomorrow in the morning. Okay. Well, here's what happened. We know that there were zealots there. We know that there were Sicarii there. We know that there were Essenes there, just like when we looked at Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found. They put those in those caves to hide them as they were on their way out, and they headed to Masada. We don't know how many of them there were. There were supposedly 960 men, women, and children on the top of that thing. In 70, when Rome gets through at Jerusalem, here they come. And they start working. They see real quick that they can't get up there to them, so they set up camp completely. There's 8 of those Roman camps built in a circle all the way around Masada, and built a wall all the way around there. Okay. Then when they started the battle, they saw, well, we can't go up this serpent trail, this snake road. So they had the idea, and they started working on this ramp. And it was 73, according to Josephus, whenever that happened. You say, well, how do we count so much on, because there's been some to try to discredit Josephus. He was much like Herod in that he was as comfortable in Rome as he was in Judea. So and as a matter of fact, early in life, in his 20s, he was in command in the army, the Jewish army. You know, he was a fighter. He is actually, when he's doing his writings, he is actually working for Rome. Rome wants it. They want the world to know, and they want it known accurately what they're doing, what's happening here. 960 men, women, and children. We don't know if there were any Christians there. There very well could have been. And I'll explain why here in just a little bit, but we don't know that. We don't know what the breakdown was. We don't know how many of those guys were the assassins, the Sicarii, and how many of them were just zealots. And of course, a zealot is just a Jew that's willing to fight. He's really willing to go to battle in what he believes. They give Rome a lot of trouble. In our books over here, you can see these stones, these rolling stones. They're 18 to 20 inches in diameter. I don't know how much they'd weigh, but they put them on the roofs. They build a double wall all the way around the perimeter of Masada. Okay? Those walls are 10 to 12 foot tall. In between the walls is another 10 feet. So then they have perpendicular walls where they actually use them for living quarters. And on their structure, in their structure up there, they've got wooden, and to me they look like railroad ties, but they've got square wooden pieces that they put on the roof. The roofs are made out of wood, and they would put those rocks on the roof, and they had, it seemed like there were 37 watchtowers around the perimeter of that thing, so you could guard it from all angles. You had the height advantage, high ground. They've got plenty of water, plenty of food. It is a rock that they felt like they could defend from now on. No one can take my rock. They find out, it gets down to things. They tried to figure out why some of the buildings burned and some didn't, because the Romans were hurling, with the catapults were hurling big balls of fire, rocks with stuff wrapped around it with flammables on it. And if they were in a place where they had a wooden roof, it burned. But they said, well, there's places the walls didn't burn. Well, they looked, when they got into excavation and got right down to it, they found the ash where they had taken the roofs off some of those rooms over by where this ramp was built, and they stacked those logs in there, one right next to another, and stacked them up 25 feet high, and then put dirt behind them and the back wall. Okay? And in Rome, they built this ramp, and this thing's over 50 foot wide. They build a battering ramp that's tall enough that they swing that ram in there, and they keep hitting that wall, and they can't figure it. They hit it for days and days and couldn't break through. Well, when they finally started breaking down the wall, the bricks fell off. They saw they had wood. They set it fire. God almost corrected things for the Jews, because the wind changed and blew the fire back on the Romans, and the apparatus, the big ram that they had, caught it on fire. Okay? And then they go back, the wind changes back, the Romans put out their fire, but it pretty much burns out that west wall going into Masada. Okay? Eleazar ben Yair was a commander of the Sicarii. He's the one that put all of this together. Everybody was taking his order. So Eleazar sees the Romans have broken through the wall. They're going back to camp. They know in the morning's going to be the morning that they're going to overtake us. They're going to kill us. He gets everybody together. And he said, okay, we've got a decision to make. They overtake us in the morning. Our women will be raped. They'll be put into slavery. Our kids will be put into slavery. They're going to crucify all the men. Be a terrible death. Our alternative is death by honor. Okay? Now, is suicide any more sinful in the Old Testament, or any more sinful in the New Testament than it was in the Old Testament? It's always been against God's will. They came up with a device. Now there was not but one suicide in this whole thing, Tim. The rest of it was murder. Each man was given the job of killing his wife and his kids. Go to your home, go to your room, you kill your wife and your kids. When that was done, all the men come back, and they draw lots. There's shards, pottery shards with names on there, and they use those to get food. They had to go through a process of getting their food. They just didn't let somebody sit there and eat all day long. They basically had to take their shard, and they kept up with what food was handed out to them. What they came up with was a system of 10 men. They drew lots and picked 10 men that was... Go ahead and turn the light on, Marcia. Turn the light on, please. Turn the light on, please. 10 men were given the responsibility of killing all the other men. Now, as it turned out, the ones that they drew on, they said it was people that knew how to kill and knew how to kill quickly. Most of them had their throat cut. And all of this is according to Josephus. Now we're going to come back and say, well, how can we count on what Josephus says? He was not there. When those 10 men were the only ones left alive, they draw again. And they pull out one name. And that one man was responsible for killing the other 9. And then he was to fall on his sword after he got that done. Okay? The Romans, they get all geared up, ready to come in the next morning. They're fired up. We're fixing to hurt these Jews. Silence. They get in there and all they find is dead people laying everywhere. As they go to searching, there's 2 women and 5 children they find down in one of those cisterns. They did not, whether there was not a man tied to them, they did not have a husband or something there, but they were out of the loop on the murder-suicide deal. They come out. All those cisterns have steps that you can go all the way to the bottom. I guess that was in case they needed to clean them out or anything. But the Romans found them. That is supposedly where Josephus got his facts. He even has Eleazar's speech that he gave when he got all the people together when they decided what to do. And you know, you might say it's kind of their Alamo. You know, because right now they say Masada will never fall. The army quotes that. Masada will never fall again. They go up there and start to excavate, and they find 3 bodies. There were 960. They only found 3 bodies. It was a young man, a young woman, and an infant child. And they were in Herod's palace on the north end. And it almost looked like she had braided hair because she had a hair braid about that long. Her hair, other than being dusty, is still intact. It's in a museum. Some of his armor, the young man's armor, was there. But it looked more like a roof or a building had collapsed on them, whether it was from some of the rocks catapulted up there, hit just right, and they got mashed. But when the military, when they found those 3 bodies, they immediately had a military service for them. They got a military burial right there on Masada. They're buried right there. So they go, where did the other bodies go? That's what put doubt about what Josephus said in everybody's mind. The first thing that comes to mind of the people that actually excavated that and the historians is the Romans just threw them over the side. Okay, it's 1,300 feet down there, sheer cliff, wild animals, sun. They wouldn't be there very long at all, and they would be gone. Another thought is they're still doing some digs up there, and they're thinking maybe there might be a mass grave, whether it be in a cistern or something like that they might find all of those bones. Now, just in the last 3 or 4 years, no, I think it was back. It was in 1967. They found 25 skeletons. Over on the south end, you go and you have to rappel to get there, but there are caves, and you can see them in some of our pictures over here. There are caves there, and they found 25 skeletons in 2 piles. I think there were 16 men, 8 women, and then the rest were kids. They don't know, and they had cooking utensils. There were sleeping. It looked like they were living there in those caves, evidently during the time of that siege when Rome took it over. For whatever reason, nobody knows if they were didn't want to be involved in the murder-suicide pact that Eleazar had them to make, or what. Maybe they were Christians. Maybe they were down there to get away from everybody anyway. But they're buried right there. Military buried them right at the top of that hill at the base of that ramp.
What happened to the ones that were still alive when they came up there? They killed them?
No, I don't know that. Josephus doesn't mention it. It's just part of the story where he got his stories. All I know. Let's look at Psalms. Turn to Psalms chapter 18. This was Judea's fort. This was their rock. This was their safety. No one could touch them. No one could touch them while they were in this place. Psalms chapter 18 verse 2 says, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Let's look at verse 31. "For who is God but the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? God is our Masada." Psalms chapter 1 and verse 3. Psalm 71 and verse 3. It says, "Be to me a rock of refuge, to which I may continually come. You have given the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress." Psalms 144 and 2. "He is my steadfast love and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield, and he in whom I take refuge, who subdues peoples under me." We've got to be careful. We've got to use God as our rock. God is our fortress. God is where we get our strength. The Jews here thought that they had the place. It was the place through the ages. Whoever maintained the top of that rock were safe. And they found out it wasn't that way. There is nothing on this earth that gives us the safety and the strength that God gives us. And we'll use that for our invitation tonight. If there's anyone here that has a need, whatever that need may be, if you will, let's be standing. We'll sing hymn number 438. Hymn number 438.